So let's get started, and I must admit, as I was reflecting on the subject today, there is a myriad of terminology that's out there talking about environmental and social issues. We've used the word social license. There's also corporate social responsibility. When you're in the capital markets and you talk to investors, they talk about ESG factors, environmental, social, and governance factors. And then, of course, we all hear about sustainability reports. So a lot of concepts, a lot of interrelationship. And so just to set a bit of a context, we thought we'd provide just a bit of a definitional context. And maybe, Alan, I'll call on you and see if you can work us through some of those definitional challenges.
Okay, I will certainly try. Interestingly enough, the concept of social license is a reasonably modern one, actually coined by a Canadian, Jim Cooney of Placer Dome in 1997, so amazingly not that long ago, and generally defined as the beliefs, perceptions, and opinions held by a local population, initially a local population, and other stakeholders about a project or a mine or a company. Obviously, that definition has now expanded dramatically over the last few years to include a wide range of stakeholders with a view about a wide range of companies. So social license is, of course, no longer the purview of the extractive industries. It is the purview of every corporation, public and private.
And maybe Valerie just say, so social license, but now sustainability, corporate social responsibility, ESG, how do those all sort of wrap together? Are they one and the same thing or slightly different nuances?
Well, I would build on what Alan initiated, and ultimately, if you're trying to achieve a social license to operate, you need to demonstrate what your performance is in a number of areas. And when we talk about sustainability, those performance areas include social issues, health and safety, human rights, environmental responsibility, and also economic responsibility. So it's really the collection of performance in each of those areas that starts to define and be disclosed around the umbrella that's called sustainability, CSR. But really every organization needs to define and call it something that matters to them.
So that gives us some perspective on the different terminology. Certainly we'll be talking about social license today. I think ESG and corporate social responsibility will slip into the discussion as well. And to get us kicked off, Valerie, why don't I send it over to you? Obviously, there's some drivers that boards need to be thinking about why this is important. There's risk frameworks to sort out, best practices, and all sorts of good things like that. So over to you.
Good. Thank you very much, John. And just to set some context in terms of what I'm going to be discussing in the next few minutes, first I'll start with giving you an overview of some of the key pressure points that are really influencing the advance and concern around the social license to operate and social license to grow. Then I'll shift to how should you be considering risks from perhaps two perspectives. One is a sector-based perspective, and then also reflecting on what does it mean to your organization as an entity. And then lastly, transitioning to really evolving best practices. And the word evolving is quite important because best practices 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and in the future are definitely changed. And they're changing because of the performance, in many cases, of the sector in itself, and also the changing expectations of the stakeholders in which are meaningful to your sector and also to your organization. So starting with globalization, really the degree to which companies are becoming global impact the size, scale, and have also impacted the level of trust or perhaps mistrust, view of fair, unfair access to resources and distribution of wealth. That in itself has also driven very complex value chains. Even just mapping a supply chain risks and opportunities in the retail sector, electronic sector, manufacturing sector is extremely difficult, particularly when you're looking at issues of human rights, environmental impact, corruption risk, or ethical practices. And as the organization grows, whether it be through global M&A, through transactions, the bullseye also grows with respects to NGOs, stakeholders that are focused and interested in what the performance around these very large corporations are actually doing. Transitioning to mass communication and technology, So whether it's being used to post, communicate, like, there is no denying that the use of social media, mass communication has transformed the landscape and the expectations, again, of stakeholders, particularly in the area of CSR. The numbers are staggering in terms of users, and the platforms continue to evolve. I'm engaging in reverse mentoring, where my daughter is actually helping me better understand how to tweet, how to position myself through social media. But I'm also giving her some advice in terms of longevity of data, and saying to Sophie, whatever you do on Facebook stays on Facebook. And we've learned that particularly well with the recent CEO of Mozilla that just resigned after an outcry based on a donation that he had made 8 years ago, which was identified and certainly put on the front page of the social landscape. Social media is really enabling what I would call the democratization of data and information. It's enabling pop-up campaigns. It's also enabling dissemination of both factual and non-factual information. This is both driving and enabling transparency. So as an organization or as stakeholders, you can Google your organization, identify some key tags, identify what your carbon disclosure project score is on Google Finance. You can look up your ESG score, as Don mentioned, in terms of your environmental, social, and governance performance is, and find this out. You can look, if you're interested in shopping, you can check out the Google Guide, which is, there are a number of applications that help you decide and make decisions about what products you should be buying based on the attributes around social and environmental attributes that you're interested in looking at. So ultimately, organizations need to be familiar with how social media is being used and become more comfortable in terms of sharing information that is increasingly important and asked by a number of stakeholders. Lastly, in terms of resource constraints, with an increased population, but more importantly, an increased middle class, this is putting pressure on our resources, whether it be energy, land, water. It impacts the cost and also availability of these resources. And these resources, although we use the word resources as one word, they are in fact the inputs that we collectively use to make products, what we consume, and also what we depend upon to maintain a standard of living. So it's important to really have a good view in terms of the availability, cost, and responsible use of these resources. These constraints in terms of resource can also be positive. It can drive efficiency, help us shape new business models, and also incorporate innovation. And the CEO of Unilever, the global conglomerate, Paul Pullman, used this to his advantage by calling out a bold goal in terms of looking at the future of Unilever and committing to doubling its growth of Unilever, at the same time halving its impact on environmental implications. It translates, resource constraints translates into the products that you're going to be making in the future. Should you be making things that are more energy efficient? Should you be looking at engagement in terms of appliances? So ultimately, this constraint really helps shape and inform, as does social media and globalization, in terms of the risks that are being posed. So if we shift now to some of the social risk identification, what you're seeing here is really looking at it from two dimensions. At a sector level, think about what sector you're operating in. Think about the issues that are most relevant to that sector. If you're in consumer business, where are you in terms of human rights? Is it animal welfare? Is it packaging? Is it looking at extended producer responsibility that's shaping the expectations? In the extractive sector, is it corruption, human rights? Is it water rights and access to those? If you're looking at telecommunications, conflict minerals, and responsible supply chain from end of life and use of products is certainly top of mind. In the financial sector, looking at principles for responsible investing, how is that impacting the scrutiny with which you're looking at your investment strategies? Understanding the performance of the sector is important. Is it a leader? Who are the stakeholders that are involved? Is the sector being targeted? What is your role within that sector? What is the role with respect to industry associations? Many industry associations today have working groups that focus on sustainability or environmental health and safety considerations. They have enabled some leading performance. If I think of the mining sector and looking at the formation of towards sustainable mining principles, they have now become a standard that is being used and copied and shared across the world in terms of a solid performance to establishing top performance in that sector. We've also seen the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. Again, the power of an industry sector is very important when you're looking at addressing issues that cannot be addressed by one entity in itself. It helps move and advance performance and also manage risks in this area. Important when you're looking also at sector risks and within your organization to not simply focus on the four walls, but really look beyond that, look at the value chain and look at also the performance with respect to supply chain. The expectation as an entity is that you should be able to understand, mitigate and be informed of the supply chain risks associated with the products that you're making. From an industry perspective, when you're looking at risks and social license, think about your growth trajectory of the organization. Where will you grow and how will you grow? Will you grow in Canada? Will you grow abroad? Will you grow in remote parts of the world? How important is your brand equity to that growth and your public image in terms of achieving its growth plans? Social license to operate is what we've talked about, but very important is the social license to grow. And as you'll hear later, you can have all the permits in place, but ultimately you need community permission to also be present. So you need to be able to acknowledge how important that is in terms of your growth strategy. You'll be assessed on past performance. So think about, can CSR, your reputation, be a real differentiator for your growth strategy and your positioning in the marketplace? Understand your customers and understand your customers' customers. What is driving activity and performance? We've seen recently McDonald's come out with a commitment that by 2016 they will only source and use sustainable beef in their product base. But what does that mean? Are you in that supply chain? Can you help define what sustainable beef will mean by 2016? We've seen other organizations, other large retailers come out and identify that within X number of years they'll be phasing out key products from their supply chain. Are you supplying that product? Do you need to get ready and be positioned in terms of responding to those customers? So again, when you're looking at these risks, it's risk from the perspective of your customers, your stakeholders, and taking a broader view. So if we shift now in terms of evolving best practice, fundamentally at the core of social license is the concept of building trust and credibility. These are critical elements in terms of achieving a social license. And so my advice would be to know your stakeholders. When I've been in this business for a long time, and stakeholders, I could count them on one hand, and in terms of who you needed to be aware of and engaged with. Today, the stakeholder base is much different. So you need to know who they are, and you also need to know their issues, because it's a bit challenging, and you can spend your time reporting, disclosing on a number of issues at, in some cases, the whim of a number of stakeholders. So it's important to better understand who they are, which ones are important to you, and which issues are material to your organization. It's also important to think about your stakeholders. Your stakeholders are not an anonymous group. They're in fact critical to your business success. They are your employees, they are governments, they are your suppliers, and ultimately they shape what can be quite successful. So engaging in meaningful dialogue also helps you better understand your future perspective in terms of what you need to, how you need to position yourselves. Some cases, organizations can be a bit nervous about that. We often get calls when an organization has been what I would call hit or with a shareholders resolution, asking them to either disclose their social performance, to produce a CSR report, to look at risks around the supply chain in terms of climate change or adaptation. And my advice really is to sit down with the group that's posting the shareholder resolution, have a discussion, engage. And in many cases, if you actually look at the proxies related to shareholders' resolutions, many of the shareholders' resolutions are in fact withdrawn because the engagement has happened, and ultimately there's been an agreement between the group that's posted the shareholders' resolution and the organization. So in many cases, the advice is to engage and at least hear from the stakeholder that's posing this. And ultimately, the above, in terms of building credibility and trust, is meaningless if you're not really committing to responsible environmental and social behavior. Because as we've heard, that behavior is increasingly being commented on in a very social way. Lastly, I'll focus on establishing mechanisms for shared value. And this, in fact, being an area that helps engage the stakeholder base. And we've seen a significant amount of good practices in this area, whether it be from the mining sector, where instead of simply building a hospital or looking at some specific cash outlay, identifying projects and cooperation in a different scale. And in some cases, we've seen the building of energy plants where the mining company might just identify an actual energy contract, allowing the local community to build an energy plant and then have a power purchase agreement. Again, community benefits by having this kind of infrastructure present. Mining company benefits from having a source of energy. And ultimately, we see elements of shared value. We've seen this as well in the tourism sector, where you're looking at engaging the local community in terms of local sourcing programs. It has a significant cost advantage to the tourism company. It has a significant advantage to the local population in terms of having sourcing contracts and enabling a livelihood. So as you're thinking about these models in the future in terms of engaging in social license, areas that have a shared value are more sustainable and also really build credibility and trust in terms of earning your license to operate.